In this demo, we're going to show a very common problem with a dataset that it's called telco churn. This problem consists in being able to predict if a customer is churns or not from a specific service. In this case, we are adding the data from a telco company. Here, in problem description, we can see all the columns that we have available for predicting. Finally, the churn column. These columns are our predictors. And we have columns like the gender, senior citizen, dependents, the tenure, the contract, or even the monthly charge, for example. Okay, with this data, the first thing we have to do when we upload the data is to check if the data types are correct. Most of the columns here are categorical columns, but we have a few columns like tenure or monthly charge and total charges that are numerical column. We have to be sure that they are selected as a decimal column or as an integer columns. Also, we can check when we upload the data. If there is any strong relationship between some of these columns, these can be seen in the correlation metric that shows us if there is a linear correlation between two columns. And we see, for example, that here, total charges and tenure has a quite strong correlation. Usually, when the correlation is very high, let's say higher than 0.95, we don't need to use both columns as a predictors because basically, both columns are bringing the same information to the model so it's not necessary to use both. Also, in the Explorer, for example, we can explore some topics about this dataset. For example, concerning the customer chart, we can ask the assistant, for example, with this is a churn rate among the customers. In this case, the Explorer says that the churn rate among the customers is approximately 26.5%. In these 6.5% of the customers are leaving the service. And we want to know why they are leaving the service, which kind of customers are leaving the service. This is going to be an insight. The answer to this question is going to be an insight from training an algorithm for predicting the churn. In this case, when we go to train model and we select the model, the column we want to predict in this case is churn. And then, automatically, it is saying that it's going to be a classification problem because we have a categorical column, and the model has to decide if it's just or not the churn. Also, we can ignore some columns. For example, we are going to ignore the customer ID. The customer ID is an ID, an identification number, a code, and has not any real influence for an algorithm to do a prediction. We're going to keep the rest of the columns, and we're going to go straight forward without any advanced configuration. Let's go to train the model, and let's check and explore the insights. Okay, NextBrain, we have produced a model with 80% of accuracy. So, it's able to predict correctly 80% of the chart column assignment, yes or not. Okay. We have a lot of suggestions here because the model has seen that there are some columns that are not having so much influence, for example, in the model to take the decision. Some columns that has not very much influence are bringing noise to the algorithm when it's working, so it's sometimes recommended to ignore them. If we want to ignore them, we just click here and will appear here in the columns to ignore. Also, a suggestion that NextBrain is giving is that this column total charge has a lot of empty values. It means that there are several rows that has nothing in this column or it's empty. NextBrain is filling up these values with several strategies. But anyway, it's giving us the chance to remove the column. Okay, because we are working with some artificial data, not real data. And also, the model have detected that the column tenure has a strong correlation, as we have seen before with total charge. But it will remove total charge. We don't need to remove the channel column. Okay, with this we can train the model again. Another thing we can see is for creating this model, the algorithm have taken into consideration basically the following columns, and with this level of important. The most important column is the contract type. Probably the contract type is saying that, for example, for a churn of yes, the contract type has to be a month. To month has to have a month-to-month value. For example, for getting a no chart in the column, it's saying, okay, it's where we have basically contract types of 2 years and contract type of 1 year. It means that the contract type is critical for the churn. So when customers has 1 month-to-month contract, it's much more easy that they leave the service. Another one is the tenure, for getting a yes, for getting a churn, meaning that leaving the company. It's more common for low tenure, where the tenure is low, so the customers are more likely to leave the company. The opposite for getting a churn, no. For keeping the service is more likely that the customer keeps the service with the tenure is higher than 20. Also, the monthly charge for leaving the company or for leaving the service, it means for a churn. Yes, it's more likely to happen when the monthly charge are higher. For low monthly charge, lower than 60, customers are less likely to leave the service. And at the same, We can explore with online security, total charge, internet service, and payment method. We can then start to create a profile of the customers that are leaving our services. Also, we can see the visual explainability here. The visual explainability here is same. Okay, let's start to describe how our customers are. If the contract is equal to month, it says that the yes, so customers are more likely to leave the company. We have here that 43% are yes and 57% are no. We made a first split in the data to start to characterize these consumers. What happens if his internet service is equal to fiber optic? What we see is that when is fiber optic, customers are a little bit more likely to leave the service. And if the tenure is greater than 15.5 is lower than 15.5, then the customers are more likely to leave the company. But still, there are some points that are not split. If total charges are greater than 120, we can say that the customers basically are going to leave the company, or are more likely to leave the company, especially when the charges are higher than 74.12. Okay, this is another way to characterize this customer to create a customer profile from this classification algorithm. It is something very similar to what we do here, but in a more visual way where we can explore what's happening with the customer that has churn, which is the blue point, and the customer that has not churn, which is the orange points.